War has been around as long as humankind. We can read in the history books the tales, sometimes legends, of warriors, of nations conquering other nations, of land switching ownership between countries, of people becoming enslaved, becoming prizes of war. We know the war has existed. In the Old Testament, in fact, we can read about warfare, how God used the people of Israel to conquer other nations, to claim the land that God had given them, but also how God has used other nations to conquer Israel, to punish them sometimes, to put them in their place when they've gone astray from God's will. And now that isn't to say, of course, that war necessarily is God's will, that war is necessarily a good thing, but it gives us a picture of God, how he has sometimes used war. But I think anytime war is tragic. Over the years, there has been a development of what's called the just war theory. Now, some detractors would say that was just a justification so that Christians could participate in war when they shouldn't. Others contend that just war does lay out a theory or a practical application of Christian love and using that love in warfare. Just war has been developed through the centuries to where there can be wars that are labeled just when they are, of course, waged for the right reasons, for just reasons. And there's a whole list of things we could look at there. But also part of just war theory is waging war justly, not just the waging, but the execution of war. How war is fought, when war is ended, what the aims are of war. So all those things come into play with just war. So we could say through history that there has been many just wars that have taken place. Let's talk about just war just briefly, just to set the stage. First, there's the aspect of just war, the justice toward war. Essentially, that's knowing when war is an acceptable option. There's 5 aspects of this on whether to wage war or not, or whether waging war would be just. First, a proper authority. I can't just decide to go to war against Mexico or Canada because they wouldn't let me in, or they wouldn't let me import something I wanted from their country. There has to be a proper authority, a proper government. For example, in the United States, it's a Congress by the Constitution that wages war. That's a proper authority. That's the first aspect. The second is that it has to be a just cause. Just land grab, or just wanting more territory, or just some reason that isn't just isn't legitimate. But if it's for defense, for example, or if people of another nation are being oppressed, if their leaders, if their military are not being fair to them, are not providing justice, things like that. There has to be a just cause to go to war. Then there has to be right intention. We can't hold up a just cause and say this is why we're going to war, but really in the back of our minds we're just thinking, well, this way we can expand our territory, or we can have other aims. So there has to be right intention, that we're doing a just thing, a right thing, helping people or defending our people, or whatever the case may be. Then fourth, it has to be the only way to right the wrong. If it's not going to work, obviously there's if that's not the only way to right that wrong, that shouldn't be the first option. Diplomacy should take place. There should be perhaps through treaties, perhaps through negotiations, through compromise. Need to work out every other way possible, or to exclude every other way possible, to remedy the situation before going to war. So it has to be the only way to right that wrong. And then finally, there has to be reasonable hope of success. If a small country would go to war knowing that they were going to lose, knowing that they were going to suffer great loss, knowing that their people would suffer great loss, well, that doesn't fit the just war, or the justice toward war that we're talking about. And so it has to have those 5 aspects: a proper authority, the just cause, the right intention, and a reasonable hope for success. But it doesn't stop there. It's not just justice toward war that's part of just war theory, but also justice in war, knowing how to execute that war, or what is acceptable in war. And essentially four aspects of this. First, it's not a consent to do evil. Just because a war may be just, it doesn't mean that we can just do whatever we want, that we can just randomly kill civilians, for example, or destroy whole towns or villages. So it's not consent to do evil. Second, there needs to be discrimination. We've codified this with like the Geneva Convention and other things like that, where only people in uniform are active or are considered the enemy or our targets. We can't target civilian populations or civilian cities. It has to be a military target, for example. Third, there has to be an intention. There has to be a reason for what is being done in executing that war, and then it has to be in the right proportion. Just to take a nuke and completely destroy a country to win that war, well, that's not right proportion, because you're killing civilians and you're doing other things that isn't just in the conflict or in that execution of that war. So all those things need to take place as part of just war. But just because a war is just, that doesn't mean that bad things don't happen. We know that in war, there's a lot of collateral damage, for example. There's civilian infrastructure that is destroyed. There are civilian people not in uniform, people not engaged in war that are killed or injured or lose their livelihoods. So even just because just war may apply to a particular war, it doesn't mean that bad things don't happen. But not just the collateral damage. We can see also in the warriors, in those participating in the wars, the injuries that take place, the maiming, the loss of limbs, the loss of life. We can envision in the United States flag-draped coffins coming home, being unloaded at Andrews Air Force Base. We can see the burials at Arlington National Cemetery, for example, that makes the news many times. The burials, the death we can see at our military hospitals, service members who are recovering from their war wounds. But these are the things that we see. There's another aspect of war, another injury from war, that just isn't visible. And in fact, many people in our country aren't aware of it. And it's what's called moral injury. So there are these unseen injuries as well. One of these is PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, or just post-traumatic stress. This happens or is a result of fear from a life-threatening or traumatic event. When you're unable to escape the threat of death, when you're not able to help yourself in this situation. And it's significant. And like I said, many soldiers, airmen, Marines, sailors experience PTSD. But beyond PTSD, or maybe an offshoot of PTSD, is what's called moral injury. Moral injury differs from PTSD in that it involves guilt and shame, while again PTSD is more about that fear of death or coming close to death. So some examples of things that can cause moral injury include participation in or direct or even indirect actions like killing or harming others, which takes place in war, witnessing death, failing to prevent immoral acts of others, knowing it has happened and not doing anything to stop it, or even giving or receiving orders from authority that are against one's moral values. So this moral injury occurs when something happens, when we do something or we allow something to happen, or in some cases witness something happening that violates our moral code, that goes against our values, our principles. And killing in war, I mean, even if it is defined as a just war, even if it's a matter of defending ourselves or others, even if it's a righteous act or a just act, still, because humans aren't designed to kill. It's not normal for humans to kill other human beings. Even if it's just, we can be injured by that, morally injured by that, because it's contrary to how we normally feel or act, or contrary to the values that we have. Well, what are some of the symptoms of moral injury? The emotional symptoms can include, of course, shame, that feeling that you've done something wrong, guilt for what you've done, or what you allowed to happen, or what you've seen. There can be depression, anxiety, anger. There can be an emotional numbing where you just withdraw or you don't feel at all. And there can be feeling conflicted and question the meaning of life, or the existence, or your organization, or what you do as a service member. Some behavioral symptoms could include engaging in alcohol or drug abuse. A lot of times soldiers or people who are victims of moral injury try to numb the pain or the feelings that they have, that we just talked about. So engaging in alcohol or drug abuse, there could be suicidal ideations, wanting to completely get away from the feelings they're having, to stop the pain. There could be social instability, not have the relationships falling apart, being isolated, not wanting to be around family members, friends, or anyone. There could be difficulty in trusting others because of what they have experienced in combat, because of the moral injury that they've been inflicted with. They could be re-experiencing the event, whether it's when there's certain triggers like smells of smoke or sounds, or in dreams they could re-experience those events. Avoidance is another behavioral symptom, just staying away from things, those triggers, staying away from those sounds or those noises, or those smells, those events, those situations that may trigger those re-experiencing events. And then sleep disturbances, not being able to sleep or not being able to not sleep, just disturbance in the normal sleep pattern. So these are some symptoms of moral injury, and basically it's that again, it's an internal feeling of because of what has been done or experienced in combat, that there needs to be some relief from that. There needs to be a healing. Now let me say first that healing is possible. This is not a terminal injury. Moral injury can be healed. But it's not necessarily easy. I can't tell you right now, for example, here's all you have to do, step 1, 2, and 3. But there are steps to go through. There's some healing steps that can take place, and forgiveness that we need to give to ourselves and to others, and even receive from others, perhaps. But the best thing to do if you're suffering, or someone you love or know is suffering from moral injury, is to get help. Not try to do it alone. Not try to self-medicate or self-treat, but to get help. Talk to a chaplain, someone that understands moral injury. Go to behavioral health on post, or other trained counselors. You could go online and find help for moral injury, but you really need to do it in community with others. Another a good program that I've become involved in recently as a participant, not as an instructor, but it's called Reboot, Combat Recovery, and it's a cognitive class. It teaches you what moral injury is about, and takes you through the steps to get relief or healing from that moral injury. You can find that online, but there's other groups, other programs as well. But the bottom line is, if you're suffering from moral injury, you really need to find help. Find somebody you can talk to. Find somebody that you can work through this with, so that you can get relief and you can get healing from that moral injury.